Your eyes are open right now, and you are still not seeing most of what is in front of you. That sentence is not a metaphor. Every second, your senses collect an estimated 11 million bits of information. Your conscious mind receives about 50. Everything else is cut before you ever know it existed. And the editor making those cuts is not neutral. It was trained by winters that killed, by famines your ancestors survived, by 10,000 generations in which noticing a threat mattered more than noticing a door. So the editor learned a rule, and it still follows it. Show the danger, hide the rest. Maybe you felt the result without knowing its source. Years pass, and your life keeps returning to the same shape, same numbers in the account, same ceiling on what feels possible, same quiet sense that other people get chances you somehow do not. You've called it bad luck. You've called it the economy, timing, age. And here is the uncomfortable part. Many of those chances were inside the frame, sometimes a few feet away, edited out by a mechanism that decided, long before you were born, that survival matters more than abundance. Think of a street you've walked for years. One morning a shop appears on it, and the owner tells you it has been there the whole time. Nothing on that street changed. The filter did. This video is about that filter, where it lives in the brain, why it favors fear, how it locks your perception into one narrow channel of reality, and what begins to happen, according to research, we will be honest about, separating what is proven from what is proposed, when a person learns to change the frequency that filter runs on. Because the world you are living in is not the world. It is one version of it, selected for you by a frightened curator. And the curator can be retrained. Let's meet the curator. Near the center of your brain, behind your temples, sit two small clusters of neurons, each about the size and shape of an almond. Together they are called the amygdala, and they are older than language, older than reason, older than anything you would recognize as you. Their job description has not changed in millions of years. Scan everything, assume the worst, act first. By the time you consciously register a face, a bill, an email from your boss, the amygdala has already decided whether it is a threat. And it errs on the side of alarm. Because in the world that built it, a false alarm cost nothing, and a missed threat cost everything. Better safe than sorry, written into tissue. For most of history, nobody knew this machinery could be heard. Then, a German cavalry officer fell off his horse. In 1893, a young soldier named Hans Berger was thrown during a training exercise, directly into the path of a horse-drawn artillery gun. The driver stopped in time. Berger walked away with bruises. That evening, a telegram arrived from his father, asking if he was all right. Because at the moment of the accident, his sister, miles away, had been seized by a certainty that something terrible had happened to him. That part of the story comes from Berger himself. No one can verify what his sister felt. What is documented is what the experience did to him. He abandoned his plans, became a psychiatrist, and spent the next 3 decades, much of it in secret, in a small laboratory in Jena, trying to measure the activity of the human mind. In 1924, he succeeded. Through the intact skull of a patient, he recorded faint electrical waves rising and falling in rhythm. It was the first human electroencephalogram. Berger had discovered that the brain hums, and the hum changes with the state you are in. When you sleep without dreaming, the waves are slow and enormous, delta. In the twilight zone between waking and sleep, in deep meditation, in that drifting state where images arrive on their own, theta, relaxed and present, eyes closed in the sun, alpha, engaged, focused, solving problems, beta. And then there is the upper end of beta, fast, spiky, relentless. High beta is the signature of vigilance. It is the sound of the smoke detector running at full sensitivity, all day, every day. Modern life parks people there. The news cycle, the deadlines, the notifications, the open loops. None of them are saber-toothed cats, but the amygdala files them under the same category, and the waves follow. Here is what that costs you. Stress research has shown for decades that under threat, attention narrows. The spotlight tightens. Peripheral information drops away. A brain in high beta sees the problem, the bill, the competitor, the worst case, with remarkable clarity, and sees almost nothing else. Opportunity does not announce itself with sirens. It tends to live exactly where the narrowed spotlight no longer reaches. Even the inertia you may know too well, the tired evenings, the idea postponed for the 4th year in a row, is not a character flaw. It is the physiology of a system spending its entire energy budget on defense. There is a second layer to the filter, and this one was installed by people who loved you. The amygdala decides what is dangerous partly by inheritance and partly by instruction. If you grew up hearing, "Money doesn't grow on trees," "People like us don't do that," "Don't get your hopes up," those sentences did not stay sentences. Repetition is physical. Neuroscientists summarize it in 5 words. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Heard enough times, at a young enough age, a phrase stops being an opinion and becomes a calibration. This is what a limiting belief actually is. Not an idea you hold, a lens you look through. And you do not argue with a lens. You cannot. You do not see it. You see through it, and you call what you see the world. Now, the filter has one property that should give you pause, because it points in both directions. You may have lived this. You decide to buy a certain car, some model you had barely noticed, and within a week the streets are full of it. Same streets, same cars. Psychologists call it the frequency illusion. Your filter received a new instruction. This matters now, and began promoting into your awareness what it used to delete. Nothing outside changed, which means the same mechanism that hides things can be made to reveal them. But notice the dark side of that symmetry. A mind convinced of scarcity keeps finding evidence of scarcity, and every finding feels like proof. The filter does not check whether its instructions are good for you. It only executes them, which brings us to a video of 6 people passing 2 basketballs. In 1999, the psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris ran what became one of the most famous experiments in the history of perception. Subjects watched a short film of 2 teams passing basketballs and were asked to count the passes made by the team in white. Halfway through the film, a woman in a full gorilla suit walks into the middle of the frame, turns to the camera, beats her chest, and walks off. She is on screen for 9 seconds. Roughly half the viewers did not see her, not saw her and forgot, did not see her. When researchers replayed the tape, some participants were so certain that they accused the team of switching videos. Their eyes had been pointed directly at a gorilla, and their brains, busy counting passes, had cut her from the broadcast. Understand what this experiment did to the old picture of perception. Seeing is not a window, it is a production, assembled, edited, and delivered to you as if it were raw reality. And the editor can drop something the size of a gorilla from the middle of the frame. You have been watching that production your entire life, counting whatever your filter told you to count. You will never know how many gorillas have crossed your frame in plain sight. That is the uncomfortable arithmetic of an edited life, and there is no way to walk it back to a comfortable distance. This is not a self-help metaphor anymore. It is the operating condition of your nervous system today while you watch this. The only question with any practical value left is this one: who writes the editor's instructions? And can they be rewritten? Before we go down into the mechanism, I want something from you, and I mean it as part of the work. In the comments, write the sentence that was installed in you as a child, the one about money or luck, or what people like us don't do. Write it exactly as you heard it, in the words of whoever said it. For many people, putting that sentence outside their own head is the first time they ever see the lens instead of seeing through it. Read the other answers too. You will recognize voices that are not from your family, but could have been. And while you write, stay with me. Because what comes next is the part of this story almost nobody tells. It involves a laboratory in California, a group of cats, a rocket fuel that should have given all of them seizures, and the first hard evidence that a brain can be trained to change its own frequency. And after the cats, a planet that hums. So the filter is physical, the states are measurable, and the editor takes instructions. The next question is where those instructions live. And the search for that answer dismantled something most of us were taught in school. You were probably taught that the brain stores everything. That somewhere in those folds there is a recording of your 8th birthday, your first kiss, the sentence about money you just wrote in the comments. In the 1920s, a Harvard psychologist named Carl Lashley set out to find the storage. The plan was blunt and logical. Train rats to run a maze, then surgically remove pieces of their cortex until the memory of the maze was cut out. He removed small pieces. The rats remembered. He removed large pieces from different regions in different combinations. The rats limped, stumbled, dragged themselves through the corridors, and remembered the maze. Lashley spent close to 3 decades hunting for the physical trace of a memory, and at the end of his career he wrote with the dry humor of an exhausted man that his research seemed to prove learning was simply not possible. Mainstream neuroscience drew a reasonable conclusion from his failure. Memory is not filed in one drawer. It is distributed across networks. The whole web holds it. That is the textbook answer today. But a small number of scientists looked at the same decades of failure and proposed something stranger. One of them was Rupert Sheldrake, a Cambridge-trained biologist. His suggestion, and you should hold it as a suggestion, runs like this. Maybe we keep failing to find the recording inside the brain because the brain is less like a recorder and more like a receiver. He offered a simple image. If you open a television and cut a wire, the picture dies. No one concludes from this that the program was being manufactured inside the box. The damage proves the box was necessary for receiving the picture. It says nothing about where the picture comes from. Brain damage that erases memory proves the brain is necessary. Whether it is the warehouse or the tuner is a separate question. Let me be exact about the status of that idea, because this channel does not sell speculation dressed as fact. Most neuroscientists reject it. It sits outside the consensus, and parts of it are difficult to test. It is a lens, a proposed way of seeing, and we are going to keep it on the table, because later in this video there are things that become very interesting through that lens. For now, here is what nobody disputes. Whatever else the brain is, it behaves like a tuner of states. Berger's machine showed it a century ago. Delta, theta, alpha, beta, different frequencies, and in each one, a different version of the world gets delivered to you. The high beta world is narrow, urgent, and poor indoors. You have lived in it, which leaves the practical question hanging right where we need it. Can a person choose the station? In 1965, in a laboratory at UCLA, a sleep researcher named Barry Sturman was working with cats. Electrodes on their skulls, a simple routine. The cat performs a small task, the cat receives its reward, a ladle of chicken broth mixed with milk. Sturman noticed something in the recordings. In the moment when a cat sat perfectly still, alert, waiting for the broth, a distinct rhythm rolled across its sensory motor cortex. Around 12 to 15 cycles per second. Calm body, sharp mind. He named it the sensory motor rhythm, SMR. Then he asked the question that would quietly found a field. Could the cat be trained to produce that rhythm on purpose? He rewired the experiment so that nothing the cat did earned broth, except the rhythm itself. The instant SMR appeared on the readout, the dispenser clicked. The cats figured it out. They would walk to the dish, settle, go still, and play that frequency deliberately like a note on an instrument to order their dinner. Sit, tune, click. A mammal with no language, no philosophy, no intention to grow, had learned to change its own brainwave at will, for soup. That alone would deserve a place in this story. What happened next is the part that still reads like fiction. In the late 60s, the American space program had a problem. A rocket fuel component called monomethylhydrazine, toxic stuff, was making people sick, and in higher doses it caused seizures. NASA needed to understand the danger, and Sturman's lab took the contract. The protocol was grim and standard for the era. Expose cats to the compound, document the progression, nausea, then tremor, then seizure. Most of the cats followed that script on schedule. A handful did not. Their seizures came late, weakened. Several never seized at all. The same dose, the same room, the same species. Sturman went looking for the variable and found it in his own records. The resistant cats were the trained ones. The cats from the SMR experiment. The ones who had spent weeks playing one calm frequency over and over for broth. Sit with what that means. The training was supposed to be a curiosity about behavior. Instead, it had physically remodeled those brains, raised the threshold at which they could be pushed into chaos. A learned frequency had become tissue. The cats had, without anything resembling effort or belief, rebuilt their own resilience from the inside, one rewarded rhythm at a time. Sturman did what a serious scientist does with an accident like that. He took it to humans. The first was a young woman named Mary, an employee at the lab in her early 20s, epileptic since childhood. Her life organized around the next seizure. Beginning in 1971, she trained on a version of the CAT protocol, sensors reading her brain, a signal rewarding her each time the rhythm appeared, 2 sessions a week, month after month. Her seizures fell away sharply. After years of being legally barred from it, she qualified for a driver's license. From her case grew the field now called neurofeedback, and honesty requires both halves of its report card. It has overhyped corners and inflated marketing, and it also has its solid ground, with the epilepsy work standing among the strongest results. The core finding survived every replication fight. A brain, given a mirror and a reward, can learn to play a chosen frequency, and the learning changes what that brain can withstand. Notice what was required. A wire, a click, broth. There is nothing mystical in the mechanism. It is the same operant conditioning that teaches a dog to sit. The cats were not seekers. The frequency answered to repetition and reward, nothing else. Now notice what you have that a cat does not. You can direct your own attention. You can slow your own breath. You can choose, deliberately, what to rehearse in imagination. And your reward system responds to meaning, not only to soup. Every tool the laboratory provided externally, you carry as standard equipment. The dial exists. It has been turned on record in cats and in humans. The question stops being whether the station can be changed and becomes which station serves you. For the filter we have been tracking since the first minute of this video, the answer has a name from Berger's alphabet: theta. Theta is the slow band, roughly 4 to 8 cycles per second, and you visit it at least twice a day without trying, in the last seconds before sleep takes you, and in the first blurred moments of waking. That borderland has carried a reputation for centuries among people who make things. Thomas Edison, as the story has been told for generations, napped in a chair with a steel ball in each hand, metal pans on the floor beneath. As sleep arrived, his grip would fail, the crash would wake him, and he would write down whatever images the threshold had been serving. Salvador Dalí ran the same trick with a heavy key over a plate and called the method slumber with a key. For a long time, this was charming folklore about geniuses. Then, in 2021, a sleep laboratory in Paris put it to the test. Subjects worked on math problems containing a hidden shortcut, then rested. The ones who dipped just into the boundary state, 1 minute was enough, and surfaced again were nearly 3 times more likely to find the hidden rule than those who stayed awake. The doorway, it turns out, was never just poetry. Something in that band does open. Here is the piece that connects theta to everything Act 1 promised you. Running through your brain is a web of regions that neuroscientists call the default mode network. It is what switches on when nothing demands your attention. And what it does with that free time is tell your story. It rehearses. It replays the argument, projects the shortfall, narrates who you are and what people like you can expect. It is, in a description more precise than comfortable, the voice of the filter, the editor reading its own instructions aloud all day. In sustained meditators, study after study finds the same signature. The default mode network quiets and slower rhythms, theta among them, rise. People describe the experience in different vocabularies: spaciousness, presence, the dropping of a weight. But the recordings agree on the direction. The narrator goes quiet, and the cuts get looser. And a filter that loosens lets through what it used to delete. This is why theta matters to the person who wrote a childhood sentence in the comments a few minutes ago. In high beta, that sentence is invisible the way a lens is invisible. You see through it, and you call the result realistic thinking. In theta, with the narrator quieted, there is finally room between you and the sentence. It can be looked at instead of looked through. The grip of an old fear softens. What felt like a wall reveals itself as a habit with a frequency. The state does not rewrite your beliefs for you. You are not a cat, and there is no broth. But it opens the workshop where rewriting becomes possible. Overcoming, it turns out, has less to do with forcing the door and more to do with changing the state in which you approach it. So a brain can learn its own dial. That is on the record. A brain in theta loosens its oldest filters. That is on the record too. Now comes the stranger question. The one Sheldrake's lens has been waiting for on the table where we left it. A tuner implies a broadcast, if the brain is, even partly, a receiver. What is it receiving? Hold that question while we look at 3 things that should not happen. Rats in Boston that somehow knew what rats in London had learned. Crystals that crystallize faster everywhere once they have crystallized anywhere. Dogs that walk to the window minutes before an owner decides to come home. And then, measured, published, and humming since before life began, the discovery that this planet has a pulse of its own, 7.8 cycles per second, right at the edge of theta. In the 1920s, while Lashley was cutting cortex in one Harvard building, a colleague of his named William McDougall was running a different rat experiment a short walk away. And McDougall's results would turn out far harder to explain. The setup was simple. Rats were placed in a tank of water with 2 exits, one brightly lit, one dim. The lit exit carried a mild electric shock. Each rat had to learn, by trial and error, to take the dim one. McDougall counted the errors each generation made before mastering the rule, bred the trained rats, and tested their offspring. He kept this up for more than 20 years, across more than 30 generations. The first generation needed over 160 errors on average to learn the rule. By the later generations, the number had collapsed to a fraction of that. Rats were being born better at a test their bodies had never taken. That alone violated the genetics of his day. Learned behavior is not supposed to pass into the bloodline. But the detail that matters most to our story was buried in his controls. McDougall, careful about his heresy, also tracked lines of rats whose parents had no training at all. Those lines improved too. And when laboratories in Scotland and in Australia repeated the experiment from scratch, with fresh rats and no connection to Harvard, their very first generations started near the level McDougall's rats had needed decades to reach. The Australian team, in Melbourne, ran it for 20 years and watched untrained control lines keep improving, as if the task itself was getting easier everywhere, for every rat. The more rats anywhere had ever solved it. Let me give these experiments their honest label. They happened. The publications exist. The anomaly in the controls was reported by the experimenters themselves. What the results mean has been argued about for 90 years. Sloppy breeding, statistical drift, unknown contamination, all proposed, none cleanly settling it. The experiments are documented. The interpretation is wide open. Sheldrake's interpretation you can already guess. The maze running was never stored in any rat. It accumulated somewhere all rats could reach. He points to a second oddity, this one from chemistry. When a newly synthesized compound is crystallized for the first time, the first attempt is often the hardest, sometimes taking years of failed tries. Once one laboratory anywhere succeeds, the same substance begins crystallizing more easily in other laboratories around the world. Chemists know this pattern well enough to joke about it. The standard explanations are mundane and partly convincing. Microscopic seed crystals hitching rides on a visiting chemist's beard, on glassware, in shipped samples. Sheldrake's reading is that the explanations strain harder than the pattern does. The first crystallization is difficult because the universe has never done it before. Everyone after is easier because, in his phrase, nature has habits. The form, once achieved, becomes a groove. And then there are the dogs. Sheldrake spent years collecting a piece of folklore every dog owner recognizes. The dog that gets up and goes to the window minutes before its owner comes home, at unscheduled times, by unfamiliar routes. With one dog, a terrier named JT, he ran film trials. The owner, miles away, was told at randomized moments to head home, and cameras recorded the dog. In trial after trial, JT was at the window disproportionately around the time the decision to return was made, before any car, any footstep, anything a nose or ear could catch. A skeptical researcher reran the trials and read the data differently. The dispute was published in both directions and was never resolved. I am not going to resolve it for you either. It sits exactly where I am placing it. A contested, fascinating, carefully filmed question mark. Now assemble the 3. Rats inheriting a skill across oceans. Forms that get easier with every repetition anywhere. A dog responding, if the favorable reading is right, to nothing but a decision. Sheldrake binds them with one proposal: morphic fields. Every species, every pattern, every form carries a field around and through it. An invisible memory bank, written by repetition, read by resonance. The field holds what the individuals learned. Each new member is born tuned to it, the way a radio is born tuned to a station it never built. Memory, in this picture, is less a thing you carry and more a thing you access, which is precisely why Lashley's scalpel could never find it. You hold that idea as what it is, a hypothesis most of biology rejects, elegant, unproven, alive at the edges of the conversation. A lens. Here is what happens when you point the lens at yourself. If anything like morphic fields exists, then a human pattern repeated by billions, across hundreds of generations, would be the deepest groove of all. And no pattern in human history has been rehearsed more than scarcity, the hoarding, the bracing, the not enough, practiced through every famine, every war, every winter that the survivors survived. Through this lens, the sentence installed in your childhood was not even the beginning of your tuning. It was a local repeater for the oldest broadcast your species transmits. When you fight your fear of lack, you may be pushing against more than a memory. You may be detuning from the most listened station on Earth, which sounds like terrible news until you remember what a field is made of. Habits. Not laws, habits. And every habit was once a first time. The first crystallization is the hardest. Someone has to do it before it gets easier everywhere. Through this lens, every person who genuinely practices a different pattern, daring instead of bracing, acceptance instead of clenching, love instead of audit, is not only rewiring one nervous system, they are deepening a newer, fainter groove for everyone tuned after them. The extraordinary is for those who dare. And through this lens, the daring do more than reach it. They carve the channel. That is the lens at its boldest. And I will say it once more so the status stays visible. Proposed, contested, unproven. What is not unproven is what the practice does inside your own skull. Sturman's cats settled that. The field idea only raises the stakes of a question we have already opened. A tuner implies a broadcast. So it is finally time to ask what, physically, measurably, is broadcasting on this planet. In 1952, a professor of electrical physics in Munich named Winfried Otto Schumann set his students a problem. Treat the Earth and the ionosphere, the electrically charged shell of the upper atmosphere, as two surfaces of a spherical cavity, and calculate what frequency would resonate in the gap. The chalkboard answer, later confirmed by measurement, was this: the space you are standing in rings. Lightning keeps it ringing. Thousands of storms are active around the globe at any moment, flashing dozens of times per second, and every flash strikes the cavity like a hand on a drum. The fundamental tone of that drum, the deepest note the planet's atmosphere can hold, vibrates at 7.83 cycles per second. It is called the Schumann resonance. It has been recorded continuously for decades, and it is solid textbook geophysics, used to track lightning and study the atmosphere. It was humming before the first cell divided, and it has accompanied every organism that ever lived. 7.83. Berger's alphabet again, the exact border country between theta and alpha, the band of the threshold, the band where Edison's steel balls dropped, the band meditators descend into when the narrator finally quiets. Now, the cautious truth, because you have trusted me this far, science has not demonstrated that human brains lock onto the Schumann resonance. Studies exist, correlations get reported, and nothing is settled. The numerical match between the planet's hum and the brain's threshold state may be resonance, and it may be coincidence. No one can currently tell you which. But there is an older way of reading it, and you came to this channel partly for the older readings, offered as what they are. Several contemplative traditions map the body as a ladder of energy centers, and at the center of the ladder sits the heart, the chakra of love, of connection, of the opening between self and world. Some teachers in those traditions speak of the Schumann resonance as the heart chakra of the Earth itself, the planet's own pulse of coherence, drumming patiently beneath the static of every anxious mind. Read that way, the picture becomes almost unbearably simple. The state of fear is a private noise. The state of stillness is a shared frequency, and every time a human being softens out of high beta, through meditation, through breath, through the kind of acceptance that lets the guard finally stand down, they drift down the dial toward the note the planet has been holding for 4 billion years. Symbol or mechanism, you do not have to decide tonight. As a symbol alone, it carries a precise instruction. The way home is not up into more vigilance. It is down toward the pulse. One layer remains, the deepest in the stack, the one the title of this video pointed to. When physicists describe empty space, they do not describe emptiness. Quantum field theory holds that even a perfect vacuum, stripped of all matter and chilled to absolute zero, still seethes, fields fluctuating, particles flickering in and out of existence, an irreducible baseline of activity called zero-point energy. This is not fringe. It produces measurable effects. Place two uncharged metal plates close enough together in a vacuum, and they are pushed toward each other by the fluctuations themselves. The Casimir effect, predicted in 1948, measured repeatedly since. The void, examined closely, turned out to be the fullest thing physics has ever described. Some physicists have gone further and proposed that this zero-point field could act as a kind of universal substrate, a sea of potentiality connecting everything embedded in it. That extension is speculative, pursued by a minority, popularized far beyond its evidence, lens declared as lens. But notice what even the sober textbook half of the picture does to the idea of abundance. You were taught by your culture and your amygdala alike that the default state of reality is emptiness and lack, that everything of value is scarce, distant, and guarded, and must be wrestled from a world of shortage. Physics, of all things, quietly reports the opposite about the fabric itself. There is no true emptiness anywhere. Every cubic centimeter of space, including the ones inside your chest, is dense with unmanifested potential. Scarcity is a fact about particular arrangements: money, time, attention. It has never been a fact about the ground of reality. The ground, as far as we can measure, is inexhaustible. So stack the whole mechanism, top to bottom, and watch how the vocabulary of this video's title stops being decoration. Your perception of reality is edited by a filter calibrated to fear. The filter's grip depends on a state, and the state has a frequency you can learn to change. That part is laboratory fact, paid for in chicken broth. Beneath the states, lens upon declared lens, the bolder picture waits. A mind that is less a sealed vault than a tuner. Fields that remember every pattern your species ever practiced. A planet holding one low note of coherence under the noise. And beneath it all, a ground state of pure potentiality in which nothing, anywhere, is finally empty. Take only the laboratory floor of that stack, and the practice you will learn before this video ends is still worth doing. Take the full stack, and manifestation stops meaning what the marketplace turned it into, begging a vending machine universe for outcomes, and becomes something quieter and more dignified. The craft of aligning one small, willing tuner with the richest signal available. Either way, the dial is in your hand. It has been the whole time. Which brings us finally to the question this entire video has been circling, the one I have been postponing because it cannot be unasked. We have talked about the filter, the states, the fields, as if you were standing safely outside them, operating the equipment. It is time to look directly at the operator. Who exactly is holding the dial? For most of this video, you have pictured yourself as the operator. The brain hums, the filter edits, the fields broadcast, and you, somewhere behind your eyes, work the controls. It is a comfortable picture. It is also the last thing standing between you and what this whole descent was built to show you. Because look at what we have actually described. The amygdala decided you were in danger before you knew it. The default mode network narrated your identity while you believed you were just thinking. The childhood sentence ran as a lens you mistook for your own clear sight. The scarcity groove was rehearsed by your species before you drew a breath. At every layer, something was running, and you arrived afterward, to take the dispatch and call it a decision. So here is the question that ends the descent, and I want you to feel where it lands rather than rush past it. If the fear is older than you, and the narrator is automatic, and the filter was installed, and the pattern is inherited, then the one who has spent all these years fighting scarcity, the effortful, exhausted self that strives and braces and tries to force the door, that self was not the solution to the filter. That self was the filter wearing your name. Stay there. The striving was the high beta state defending its territory. The vigilance you were proud of was the smoke detector you mistook for a self. Every time you gripped harder, you fed the exact frequency that keeps the doors invisible. The struggle against lack was lack, maintaining itself, using your willpower as fuel. This is the death the whole journey was walking toward. Not the death of you, but the death of the one you thought was you. The operator was never standing outside the machine. The operator was the machine's loudest program. And when that program goes quiet, not defeated, simply seen, simply unplugged from the belief that it is you, something is still there. Something was watching the narrator narrate. Something noticed the fear without being the fear. Sturman's cat could not do this. It had no seat above the rhythm from which to choose the rhythm. You do. The capacity to observe your own state is the one thing in the entire stack that is not automatic. And it is the actual operator, the one that was holding the dial all along, mistaken all these years for the noise it was listening to. This is what the contemplatives were pointing at with their quiet word for it. Awareness that the frightened mind is not the self. And it is what changes the meaning of every technique still ahead of you. You are not going to fight the filter. You cannot. The fighter is made of the same material. You are going to do the only thing the real operator can do. Step back from the controls far enough to change which hand is on them. Watch how the whole vocabulary turns over once you make that move. Manifestation. The marketplace sold it to you as transmission. Strain hard enough, visualize loud enough, and force your order into a reluctant universe. But strain is high beta. Every guru who told you to want it more was tuning you to the one frequency where the doors stay shut. Through everything we have laid down, manifestation reverses. It is not broadcasting harder into the field. It is going quiet enough to receive what the field, the planet's low note, the ground of pure potential, is already offering. And then recognizing the opportunity your filter used to delete. Not commanding the world. Clearing the lens. The vending machine universe was always a projection of the scarcity it claimed to cure. Acceptance. You were taught it was surrender, the loser's word, giving up the fight. But the fight was the filter. Acceptance is the precise act of standing down from high beta, letting the guard that has been clenched for decades finally lower. It is not the absence of action. It is the state from which clear action, undistorted by fear, becomes possible for the first time. The cat had to settle before it could find the rhythm. So do you. Love. The hardest one to say without it sounding soft, so let me say it as mechanism. Fear narrows. You have known that since the first minutes of this video. Its opposite widens. Whatever you choose to call the open state, love, warmth, the heart center the old traditions placed at the middle of the ladder, it is, in the language of this whole video, the wide aperture frequency, the one nearest the planet's own pulse at the border of theta. Fear shows you a world of 6 doors and hides 5. The open state lets the aperture all the way open. This is why the traditions never separated love from abundance. They were describing the same widening in 2 vocabularies. And the fear itself, the thing you came here wanting to defeat, it does not need defeating. It was a frightened curator doing a job it was given before you could speak, protecting a child who needed protecting in a world that no longer exists. You do not kill the curator. You thank it, and you take back the pen. Reframing in the end is not arguing with the old sentence. It is recognizing who was speaking it and gently declining to keep reading it aloud. That is the elixir this descent was carrying. Not a power you acquire, a recognition you cannot unhave. The scarcity was never the truth about reality. Physics says the ground is full. The planet says the home node is coherence. And the filter that said otherwise was a survival program, not a verdict. You were never lacking. You were tuned to lack by hands that loved you and a species that suffered. And tuning is the one thing in all of this that has been proven in a laboratory to change. You stand now where the cat stood before the rhythm came. Knowing the dial is real. Knowing the operator is you, the quiet one, not the loud one. Knowing which direction is home. If something in the last few minutes landed, if you felt the floor shift under the word you even slightly, then subscribing is not a favor to a channel. It is choosing to keep company with the version of you that just woke up instead of the curator who would prefer you forget all this by morning. Because the curator will try. Old frequencies reassert themselves. That is what habits are. Staying near this work is one way the new groove gets the repetitions it needs to deepen. Subscribe, And let the next video find you on a day the old station is loud. And it will be loud, which is exactly why the recognition you just had is not enough on its own. Insight in theta tends to evaporate when high beta floods back at 8 a.m. The inbox, the bill, the old sentence, the whole machinery of the narrow world switching back on. So the last thing left to do is the most practical thing in this entire video. Not how to glimpse the open state once. How to stand in it on a Tuesday, under pressure, when everything in your nervous system is reaching for the dial to turn it back. That is where we go now. And it is simpler than the marketplace ever wanted you to believe. Everything you need for this last part you already own. That is not a consolation line. It is the design constraint this practice was built around. No device, no subscription, no retreat in the mountains, a nervous system, 2 daily windows your biology already opens for you, and the one capacity the whole climax turned on, the quiet observer that can notice a state without becoming it. The cats needed a laboratory. You need a morning and an evening. Start with the morning, because you wake up holding an advantage you have been throwing away for years. Every day in the first minutes after sleep releases you, you surface through the borderland. Theta fading, alpha rising, the filter still soft, the narrator not yet fully on duty. It is the most suggestible, most open state your brain will visit all day. And what do most people do with it? They reach for the phone. Understand what that gesture is in the language of this video. It is handing the curator a list of emergencies before your eyes fully open. Headlines, messages, other people's urgency, high beta injected directly into an unguarded filter. You arm the scarcity program before your feet touch the floor, then spend the day wondering why the world looks like a list of threats. So the first practice costs nothing and replaces nothing except that reach. Stay in the borderland for a few minutes. Feel the body, follow the breath. Let the threshold be a threshold. And while the filter is soft, give the editor one instruction for the day. You already know this works at the mechanical level. It is the car phenomenon from the first act, used on purpose. The instruction is not an affirmation shouted against doubt. It is quieter, almost administrative. Show me one door today. One opening, one resource, one person, one detail I would normally delete. You are not asking the universe to rearrange itself. You are telling your own attentional system what to promote into awareness. That distinction is the entire difference between this practice and the marketplace version of manifestation. And it is why no promise is needed. The filter takes instructions. That much was demonstrated to you by a gorilla. Then the day begins, and the day is where every beautiful state goes to die. So the daytime practice is not about holding a state. It is about catching the dial. Several times a day, at moments you choose, before a difficult call, in the car, when the old tightness arrives in the chest, ask one question. What frequency am I paying from right now? Just the asking is the practice. The question summons the observer, and the observer, you now know, is the only one who can change anything. If the answer is high beta, the clench, the bracing, the narrow spotlight, you have one tool that reaches the nervous system faster than any thought, because it goes through the body. Lengthen the exhale. Breathe in normally, and let the out-breath run long and slow, twice as long as the in-breath for a minute or two. The physiology here is ordinary and well documented. The long exhale leans on the parasympathetic side of your nervous system. The heart eases. The alarm de-escalates. It will not transport you to theta at your desk. It does something more useful. It loosens the grip of the one frequency in which nothing in this video can reach you. Alongside the state work, give the filter its daily training. I think of it as the gorilla hunt, and it is the practical heart of everything we have built. Once a day, deliberately, find one thing your filter would have deleted. A possibility you dismissed without examining. A skill of yours that someone valued and you discounted. A stranger's remark that contained an opening. A detail on a street you have walked for years. The first days, this feels forced, like counting passes in reverse. Then it begins to feel like what it is. The frequency illusion, pointed for once at doors instead of dangers. And each time you catch one, mark it. Pause. Name it. Let yourself feel that you found it. That small completion is your chicken broth. You are running Sturman's protocol on your own perception. The noticing is the rhythm, the satisfaction is the reward, and repetition writes it into tissue. Nothing mystical. A brain, a mirror, a reward. And the lab already showed you what that loop can remodel. The second window your biology opens is the evening, and it matters more than the morning because of what the narrator does with your last waking material. Left alone, the default mode network rehearses threats, the awkward moment, the unpaid thing, tomorrow's confrontation, and carries that rehearsal across the threshold into sleep, filing it where the filter reads its instructions. So in the minutes before sleep, while you descend through the borderland in the opposite direction, feed it different material. Walk back through the day and collect what went right. The door you found on the gorilla hunt. The moment the exhale worked. The thing that arrived without being forced. This is not gratitude as a moral performance, and you do not have to feel anything elevated while you do it. It is instruction, delivered at the hour the editor is listening. You are not thanking the world so the world will be nicer to you. You are showing the curator, one evening at a time, what category of thing to stop deleting. Now the part every honest teacher owes you and few deliver, you will lose it. Some morning, 3 weeks from now, or 3 days, you will wake up already clenched, reach for the phone, skip the practice, snap at someone, and hear the old sentence running in your own voice as if this video had never happened. The marketplace treats that as failure because the marketplace needs you to feel like a failure, so you will buy the next solution. Look at it through everything you now know instead. The old station has had decades of repetitions. Of course, it reasserts itself. That is what a groove is. Relapse is not the collapse of the work. Relapse is weather. And here is the detail that changes everything. The moment you notice you have relapsed, that exact moment of, there it is again, is not the failure. It is the practice succeeding. The observer just came back online. Every single time you notice the old frequency and step out of it, however briefly, you have done one more repetition of the only movement that matters. The inertia you used to read as proof of your weakness becomes nothing more than the measured resistance of an old habit being outvoted. And if Sheldrake's lens holds even a fraction of its shape, held lightly as ever, your repetitions may be deepening a groove that others, tuned after you, will find a little easier to reach. You will never know. It is a good thought to practice next to. Which brings us to the last thing this channel will ever ask you to believe, and it is a refusal. You do not need this channel. You do not need a teacher with a stage, a bracelet, a frequency download, or anyone standing between you and your own nervous system. Everything in this hour pointed at equipment you were issued at birth, an attention you can aim, a breath you can lengthen, 2 thresholds a day, and the witness that none of the noise ever managed to be. Come back here for company, for the next descent, for the pleasure of understanding one more layer, never for permission. A guide who makes himself necessary has misunderstood the work. The work was always an inside job. So let me take you back to where we started, because you are not the person who started. An hour ago, I told you that your eyes were open and you were not seeing most of what was in front of you. 11 million bits arriving every second, 50 let through, an editor trained by winters and famines deciding in the dark which 50. When you heard that the first time, it was a disturbing fact about the brain. Hear what it is now. It was never a sentence. It was a hinge. Because if the world you have been living in is a selection, if the flat ears, the closed doors, the same numbers in the account were one broadcast among possible broadcasts, assembled by a frightened curator from 11 million bits of raw, unjudged reality, then nothing about your life so far was a verdict. It was a channel. And you have spent this hour learning in laboratory detail that channels can be changed. A cat did it for broth, a woman did it and drove away with a license, and the planet itself holds the home frequency steady at the border of theta, patient as weather, whether or not anyone ever proves it is listening. Tomorrow morning, you will walk a street you think you know. Walk it like the owner of a new instrument. Somewhere on it, there is a shop you have not seen. A door, a person, an opening filed for years under irrelevant by a program that thought it was saving your life. The street will not have changed. If you have done even a little of this work, the broadcast will have. And the morning you spot it, the morning something that was always there finally appears, you will stand on an ordinary sidewalk feeling the strangest joy this work has to offer. The discovery that abundance was never on the other side of the world. It was on the cutting room floor. The old curator promised you safety inside the narrow world, and it kept that promise. Narrow worlds are safe the way cells are safe. Stepping into the wide one was never going to feel comfortable. Wide is where the gorillas are, and the doors, and everything the filter spared you from having to want. It takes a particular kind of nerve to instruct your own perception to show you more, knowing you will then be responsible for what you see. That nerve is the whole price. The extraordinary was never rationed, never hidden, never reserved for the gifted or the lucky. It is simply for those who dare to look at the unedited world. Your eyes will be open tomorrow. For the first time in a long time, let that mean something.